Nara!
Nobody leaves Crestholm Palace without being seen. Lady Nara Vesson understood this from the start, which is why she chose to leave before dawn, through a side entrance, with no farewell and no trace beyond a single resignation letter left behind on the Duke's desk. Every detail had been planned. By the time it was found, she would be gone. She was close now. The marble entrance hall stretched before her, the doors just ahead, freedom only a few steps away. Then the east gallery doors opened. Dorian Ashcroft, the Duke of Crestholm, stepped into the hall as if he had been waiting all along. The quiet of the early morning staff fell into complete silence as his presence filled the room. His gaze found hers across the marble floor, steady, unyielding. And when he spoke, it was not her title he used. Nara. Just her name, clear enough for everyone to hear. She stopped. For a moment, she did not move at all. Then, slowly, she turned around. Subscribe now. If you have not yet subscribed to this channel, please do so right now. Every time we bring you royal romance stories filled with forbidden love, betrayal, fearless women and powerful men who refuse to let go of what matters. Tap subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a single story. Now let us return to Nara and the Duke who called her name when she tried to disappear. The position she should never have accepted. 9 months before the morning in the entrance hall, Lady Nara Vesson had arrived at Crestholm Palace with a leather satchel of correspondence tools, a letter of appointment from the Royal Administrative Chamber, and the very specific intention of staying exactly as long as required and developing no attachments to anything within the palace walls. The appointment was not what she had wanted. She had applied, through the proper channels, for a position at the Royal Archive in the Eastern City, a role that would have suited her precisely, quiet, ordered, surrounded by documents rather than people, with a clear scope of responsibility and no requirement to navigate the complex social architecture of a ducal household. The archive had declined her application on the grounds of the moratorium on new appointments that had been in place for 2 years. The Royal Administrative Chamber had then offered her the Crestholm position as an alternative, and Nara, who had practical financial obligations and a younger brother's education to support, had accepted. She had accepted it as a temporary measure. This was the first of several things she would tell herself that proved to be less true than she intended. Nara was 26 years old and had the kind of presence that most people initially underestimated and then rapidly revised. She was not tall, but she carried herself with the economical uprightness of a woman who had been making herself take up the correct amount of space her entire life rather than less. She had warm amber-toned brown skin and wide dark eyes with the quality of someone who was always reading something, whether it was on a page or in a person's face, and dark brown hair she wore in a neat practical plait that she pinned up for formal occasions and kept severe the rest of the time. Her hands were always ink-stained. Her expression was typically composed to the point of being unreadable, which people interpreted as coldness until they spent enough time with her to understand it was precision, the specific quality of a person who does not commit their face to a thing until they are certain what the thing is. She arrived on a Tuesday in late autumn and was received by the palace steward, a meticulous man named Orlan who managed the household with the focused pride of someone who considers the smooth operation of a great house to be its own form of art. Orlan showed her to the correspondence office in the north wing, a well-appointed room with high windows and shelving that had clearly been in disorder for some time before someone had attempted to restore it, the attempt visible but incomplete. Nara surveyed the room. She set her satchel down. She spent the first 3 hours reorganizing the shelving before she touched a single document, which Orlan observed from the doorway with an expression that suggested he had not expected this but was deeply relieved by it. She met the Duke on the 4th day. Not formally. Not in the way of an introduced presentation or a summoned audience. She met him in the North Wing corridor at 7:30 in the morning when she was carrying a stack of the previous year's correspondence files toward the archive annex, and he was walking in the opposite direction reading a report with the absorbed attention of a man who has decided that a corridor is an appropriate location for this activity. They nearly collided. Nara adjusted her grip on the files. The man looked up from the report. Dorian Ashcroft, the Duke of Crestholme, was 34 years old and physically occupied the kind of space that courts notice, tall and broad through the shoulders, with warm dark walnut skin and sharp dark eyes that moved rapidly and observed comprehensively, and dark hair that he wore swept back from his face without particular ceremony. He was wearing charcoal court dress at 7:30 in the morning, which told Nara something about his habits before she had been formally introduced to them. The Crestholme crest, a crescent moon over a rising hawk, was on his left lapel in silver. He looked at her and then at the files and then at her again. Nara informed him that she was the new correspondence secretary and that she had been reorganizing the archive system and was currently transporting the previous year's files, and she said this with the efficiency of a woman who has decided that a 4-sentence introduction is sufficient for most purposes. The Duke observed her for a moment with the dark eyes that she would come to understand looked at most things with this quality of rapid comprehensive assessment. He said that the previous correspondence secretary had been reorganizing the archive system for 6 years without completing the task. Nara said that the previous system had been organized according to a logic that was decorative rather than functional and that she had started again from the foundational categories. A pause. The Duke said that his morning briefing began in 15 minutes and that 3 of the documents required for it were in the files she was currently carrying. Nara set the stack down in the corridor, located the 3 documents with the ease of someone who had already committed the new system to memory, and handed them over without commentary. The Duke looked at the documents. He looked at her. He said that she had been employed for 4 days. Nara confirmed this. He said nothing further and walked on toward his morning briefing, and Nara picked up her files and continued to the archive annex, and the interaction was, by any external measure, entirely unremarkable. She thought about it 3 times before the end of the day. She told herself this was because she was cataloging information about her employer's habits, which was professionally appropriate. This was the second thing she told herself that proved to be less true than she intended. The weeks that followed established a working pattern that Nara managed with the precision she brought to everything. The correspondence office had a natural rhythm, incoming dispatches from the Crown administrative apparatus, the estate management reports, the social correspondence that a Duke of Crestholme's standing generated and received a considerable volume. Nara processed it all with an efficiency that produced, within the first month, a visible improvement in the speed and accuracy of the Duke's administrative responses. Dorian Ashcroft noticed. He did not comment extensively, but Nara had quickly learned that the Duke expressed approval through the quality of his attention rather than through explicit statement, the specific way he directed questions to her rather than to Orlin on matters that crossed into her domain, the occasional report left on her desk with a single precise notation in the margin requesting her analysis rather than merely her filing. She analyzed. She filed. She remained professionally composed and personally distant in the manner she had determined was appropriate and necessary. She did not entirely succeed at the personally distant portion. The difficulty was that Dorian Ashcroft was not what she had expected a duke to be, and she had worked adjacent to enough of the nobility to have formed expectations. He was not decorative. He was not concerned primarily with his own consequence. He was a man who worked with genuine focus on the responsibilities of his title and the welfare of the people and land attached to it, and this was visible in everything, in the nature of his correspondence, in the decisions she processed documentation for, in the way he moved through his own house. She had expected authority worn as performance. What she found was authority worn as obligation. The distinction was, she discovered with some dismay, one she found deeply affecting. The first real conversation happened 6 weeks into her tenure. She had been working late on a routing error in the estate accounts correspondence, a misfiled series of letters that had created a gap in the administrative record that needed closing before the quarterly review. She was in the correspondence office at 9:30 when the door opened and the Duke entered, clearly returning from somewhere formal given the full court dress, and stopped when he found her still at the desk. Nara began explaining the routing error. Dorian Ashcroft sat down in the chair across from her desk and listened. This was, she realized mid-explanation, the first time he had sat down in her office. She finished the explanation. He asked 2 precise questions about the account structure that told her he had understood every detail of what she had described. Then he asked, which was not what she had expected, how she had come to understand estate accounting well enough to identify the specific category of error she had described. Nara said that she had managed her own family's accounts since she was 19 and that estate accounting operated on the same foundational principles, just at considerably larger scale. The Duke said that the Royal Archive had declined her application 2 years ago. Nara was very still for a moment. She said that her application had been declined due to the hiring moratorium. Dorian Ashcroft said that the moratorium had been lifted 8 months ago and that the archive had hired 4 new archivists in the intervening period. A long pause. Nara absorbed this information with the composed face she had learned to maintain regardless of interior circumstance. She said that she had not been informed. The Duke said that he was aware of that. He said that her appointment letter had been issued from the administrative chamber before the moratorium lifted and that someone in the chamber had not updated her file when it did. Nara said that she understood. Dorian Ashcroft looked at her with the dark eyes that missed very little. He said that he wanted her to know that she was not trapped in the position. That if she preferred the archive she was free to make application and he would provide whatever recommendation was required and hold her position at Crest Home for a reasonable period while the transition was arranged. Nara looked at the papers on her desk. She looked at him. She said that she would consider it. She did not apply to the archive. She told herself it was because the routing error in the estate accounts needed closing first. This was the third thing she told herself that proved to be considerably less true than she intended. The distance she failed to keep. The archive routing error was closed in 3 days. Nara did not apply to the Royal Archive. The position at Crest Home continued, and with it the specific daily proximity that she had begun to understand was the real difficulty, not the work, not the palace, not any of the dozen factors she had been willing to name as reasons for the particular quality of restlessness she carried through her days. The real difficulty was Dorian Ashcroft. Not in any way she had expected or had been equipped to manage. It was not the authority, though the authority was considerable. It was not the physical presence, though that was notable. It was the specific quality of his attention, the way he engaged with problems including her problems, including the routing error that had occupied one evening, including every subsequent occasion on which a document question produced an actual exchange rather than a brief transactional answer. He thought out loud when he thought she was worth thinking out loud with. He asked her opinion on things that were not strictly within her correspondence remit. He remembered, without being reminded, the things she had mentioned in passing. These were not the behaviors of a man who considered her furniture. Nara spent 3 months building and maintaining a professional distance that was technically intact and functionally eroding, and she was aware of both facts simultaneously, which was the specific quality of a situation she could observe perfectly clearly and was failing to address. She was not permitted to address it in the way that would have resolved the problem. This was the constraint she returned to, always, whenever her internal accounting reached the point of clarity. Lady Nara Vesson was the employed correspondence secretary of the Duke of Crest Home. Dorian Ashcroft was the Duke of Crest Home. The social architecture of the court was not ambiguous on the subject of that particular distance. A duke contracted advantageous alliances. A duke did not develop personal attachments to his secretarial staff. The court would not misread it, the court would read it exactly correctly and the consequences of that reading would fall entirely on Nara. She understood all of this with complete lucidity. Understanding did not prevent the accumulation. The morning in the East Gallery was in the 5th month. Nara had been delivering the weekly correspondence summary when she found the Duke not at his writing desk but at the East Gallery window, standing with a document in his hand and the particular stillness of someone who has stopped reading because something else has taken priority. The East Gallery window overlooked the Crest Home lower gardens, and beyond the gardens the southern road that ran from the palace toward the city, and beyond that, on clear days, the edge of the estate's old forest. She set the summary on the desk. She began to withdraw. Dorian turned from the window. He said, without preliminary, that the document he was reading was a petition from the Crestholme Estate Southern Village on the matter of the road maintenance funding, and that the petition had been sitting in the administrative queue for 6 weeks, which was his failure and not the village's, and that he would like her to draft a response that acknowledged the delay and committed to the specific repair schedule that the estate engineer had proposed 2 months prior but which had not been confirmed. Nara said she would have the draft ready before noon. He said that was not the point. He said the point was that a community of people had submitted a legitimate petition to their landlord and received silence for 6 weeks because the system had failed to flag the urgency, and that he considered this a failure of his specific obligation. Nara regarded him. She said that the flagging system she had implemented the previous month would have caught it had it been in place at the time of the petition submission. Dorian Ashcroft said that he knew that. He said he was not looking for reassurance. He was observing that the obligation mattered to him and that she appeared to be someone who understood why obligations mattered, and that he found this to be increasingly rare. The East Gallery was quiet for a moment. Nara said that she would have the draft ready before noon. He looked at her in the way she had catalogued by now, the specific quality of the dark eyes when they were not performing their public function but were simply present and direct. He said her name for the first time. Not Lady Vesson. Not the secretary. Her name. He said Nara, and then said that he had read her letter to the administrative chamber regarding the archive reorganization, the letter she had submitted 3 months into her tenure outlining the systemic issues in the palace's current record-keeping and proposing a comprehensive solution. Nara said that the letter had been submitted through the proper internal channels and she had assumed it had been received. Dorian said it had been received. He said it had also been the most precise and structurally sound administrative proposal the chamber had received in 4 years, and that he had submitted it with his formal endorsement to the Crown's Review Committee and that it was currently under consideration for implementation across all royal administrative offices. Nara was entirely still. She said that she had not been informed of that. He said that he was informing her now. Another pause. She said, carefully, that she appreciated that. Dorian Ashcroft said that appreciation was not required. Credit was. He said it simply, with the directness of a man who says what he means without expecting anything back for saying it, and Nara stood in the East Gallery of Crestholme Palace and felt something that she had been holding carefully in suspension tip past the point of suspension. She left the gallery as soon as was professionally appropriate. She walked back to the correspondence office and sat at her desk and did not pick up her pen for 4 minutes. Then she picked it up and drafted the village petition response with great precision and delivered it before noon as she had said she would, and she did not allow herself to examine the 4 minutes too closely. The examination came later. It came on the evening of the winter reception, which was the large formal gathering Crestholme hosted each year for the extended court and the regional nobility, a 200-person event that required 3 weeks of correspondence preparation and a full afternoon of final arrangement oversight that fell, as most things organizational fell, to Nara. She had managed the preparation with her usual efficiency. She had not planned to attend the reception itself beyond the first hour required to ensure the correspondence arrangements were functioning correctly. She had not planned to be present when Dorian Ashcroft, midway through the second hour of the reception in the main hall, looked across the room and found her in the crowd with the specific quality of attention that had no professional explanation. She had not planned for the particular quality of that look to lodge in her chest and remain there. She had not planned for Lady Corianne Vance, the eldest daughter of the Earl of Drayfields, beautiful and accomplished and eminently suitable in every way the court assessed suitability, to spend 40 minutes in close conversation with the Duke in the reception room while Nara managed the final correspondence details in the adjacent office and heard, through the connecting door, the conversation that she was not supposed to be within hearing distance of. Not because it was private. It was entirely public in its content. Because Lady Corianne said, with the smooth confidence of someone conducting an expected negotiation, that the Drayfields alliance would suit Crestholme admirably in the current political climate and that she believed the families were well aligned. And the Duke said, in a tone that carried the weight of a man being asked something he had already privately answered, that he was certain the Drayfields family were people of great distinction. He said nothing further. Lady Corianne paused, then shifted the conversation elsewhere. Nara stood in the adjacent office with a correspondence bundle in her hands and catalogued what she had heard and what she had not heard and what the distinction meant, and understood, with complete and unwelcome clarity, that she was in considerably more difficulty than she had permitted herself to acknowledge. She went back to her rooms that night and began, for the first time, to think about the archive. What cannot be filed or forgotten? The decision to leave took 3 months to become a resolution. It was not a simple decision. Nothing that involved dismantling something that had been built gradually and involuntarily over 9 months was simple. But Nara was a woman who had always understood that the clarity of a thing and the ease of it were not the same thing, and the thing was clear. She was in love with Dorian Ashcroft. She had been, she could now admit, for a considerable time. And love of this specific and structurally impossible kind did not resolve through continued proximity. It compounded. The archive position was still available. She had verified this carefully, through anonymous inquiry, 2 weeks after the winter reception. The moratorium remained lifted. The archive was actively seeking qualified staff. She could make application, be appointed within a month, and transition to the archive before the spring administrative cycle began at Crestholme. She began drafting her resignation letter in January. The letter took 9 drafts over 6 weeks. Not because she did not know what to say. Because the challenge was to say it in a way that was professionally complete and personally impenetrable, that offered no opening for the conversation she could not have, that closed the door precisely and without creating any visible weight at the point of closing. A resignation letter that did not look like a retreat. A resignation letter that contained no evidence of the 8 months of accumulated interior accounting it had taken to write it. The 9th draft was correct. The departure plan was constructed over the following 2 weeks with the same meticulous attention she gave to every complex logistical challenge. Pre-dawn departure to avoid the peak staffing hours when the palace was most populated. The side entrance through the kitchen corridor rather than the main hall. A carriage arranged through a coachman in the lower city under the name of a fictional correspondence client. Her trunk sent ahead the previous evening under the pretense of a document transfer. The resignation letter on the Duke's writing desk where the morning briefing staff would find it before her absence was remarked upon. Every detail was managed. What Nara had not managed was the question of whether Dorian Ashcroft was a man who would allow a carefully planned departure to proceed unchallenged. This was, she would later reflect, a significant oversight for a woman of her observational capacity. The morning of her departure was the 15th of March. She rose at 4, dressed in her traveling clothes, a composed dark navy court traveling gown with a heavy wool cloak against the late winter cold, her dark hair in its practical plait beneath the cloak hood. She moved through the palace corridors in the pre-dawn quiet with the ease of a woman who had memorized the household's morning rhythms over 9 months and knew precisely which passages were empty at which hours. The correspondence office was not part of her route. She had cleared it the previous week, organizing her files and notes into the systematic order that would allow whoever replaced her to continue the work without disruption. She had thought of this as one of her final professional obligations and had discharged it thoroughly. She had not gone back to the office after that. She had not gone near the East Gallery. The kitchen corridor was empty. The side entrance was unlocked, as she had arranged. The courtyard beyond it was gray with the first pale light of a March dawn, cold and clear, and Nara crossed it with the measured pace of a woman who has rehearsed this distance many times and found it the same on the actual morning as in the rehearsal. She reached the palace's inner gate. Through it, the main entrance hall was visible across the inner courtyard, the great marble floor lit by the permanent burning of the entrance torches. She could go around the edge of the courtyard to the secondary gate and avoid the hall entirely. She had planned to go around. She did not go around. She told herself afterward that she did not know why she had walked through the entrance hall rather than around it, and this was probably the only thing she had ever told herself that was entirely true, because the decision was not a decision. It was the last small failure of the distance she had been building for 8 months, the single place where the architecture of her careful planning had a flaw, and the flaw was that she wanted, before she left, to walk once more through the space that had been most purely his. The entrance hall of Crestholme Palace was 60 feet long and 40 wide, with a floor of pale marble veined in gray and gold, 2 staircases rising to the upper galleries on either side, and a ceiling that went up 3 floors to a painted vault depicting the history of the Ashcroft line. It was the most formal and most public space in the palace, and at 5:30 in the morning it was populated by the earliest household staff, the morning guards completing their rotation, the first kitchen workers crossing from the service wing, the steward's assistant checking the day's initial log. Nara walked into the entrance hall at the north end. She was 20 feet from the south door when the east gallery doors opened. She heard them and did not look. She was 10 feet from the south door and still not looking when the gallery doors opened, because she had identified the sound as the east gallery specifically, which was his gallery, and looking was the one thing she could not permit herself to do. She was 5 feet from the south door. Then her name. Not Lady Vesson. Not the secretary. Not the formal address that would have been appropriate and correct and would have given her a professional frame to turn within. Nara. The way he said it was not a command. It was not a performance for the room, though the room was full and the room heard it and the room went silent around it. It was the specific quality of a man saying the single word most likely to produce the outcome he required, not because it was strategic but because it was true. The most direct address available. Her actual name. The thing she was. Nara stopped walking. She stood with her back to him and the south door 5 feet away and the accumulated weight of 9 months between her shoulder blades, and she stood very still for a moment that felt considerably longer than its actual duration. Then she turned around. Dorian Ashcroft stood in the entrance of the East Gallery in full court attire, charcoal coat and a silver crest-home crest, dark eyes on her across 60 feet of marble, and his expression was not the composed authority of his public self or the precise engagement of their working hours. It was something she had not seen on him before. Raw. Direct. The face of a man who has decided that the cost of composure in this moment is too high. The entrance hall was entirely silent. Every member of the morning household staff had stopped what they were doing. Nara stood in the middle of the marble floor with her traveling trunk somewhere in the city being driven toward the coast by an arranged carriage, and her resignation letter on his writing desk, and 9 months of carefully maintained professional distance behind her, and looked at the Duke of Crestholme across the pale gold marble. She said his name. Not your Grace. Not the Duke. Not the formal address she had always used in his presence. Dorian. She said it quietly enough that only the silence made it audible to the room. He crossed the entrance hall toward her in the measured stride she had been cataloguing since a north corridor near collision in late autumn, and the household staff parted around him in the unconscious way of people responding to something they do not entirely understand but recognize as requiring space. He stopped in front of her. He said that he had read the resignation letter. Nara said that she had intended him to find it at the morning briefing. Dorian said that Orlan had found it the previous evening during the final desk review and had brought it to him immediately. A pause. Nara said that she had not accounted for the final desk review. He said that she had accounted for nearly everything else. She said that she was aware of that. He said that he wanted to know one thing before she made any further decisions about her departure. The entrance hall was silent around them. 60 feet of pale marble. The morning light beginning at the high windows. Dorian Ashcroft said, with the directness of a man who has determined that indirect speech is no longer available to him, that he understood the architecture of the difficulty. That he was not unaware of what the court required and what it forbade. That he had spent 4 months understanding these constraints and examining whether they were immutable or whether they were the kind of constraints that appeared immutable until examined from the position of someone willing to accept the cost of examining them. He said that he had found, on examination, that they were the second kind. He said that he required to know whether she had left the palace because the position no longer suited her, or whether she had left the palace because she had determined that the thing she wanted was not possible and had decided to spare herself the continued proximity to an impossibility. The morning light was fully at the windows now. Nara looked at him for a long moment. She said that it had been the second reason. He said that she had been wrong about it being impossible. The silence in the entrance hall had the specific quality of 300 years of a building that had heard many significant things and was entirely capable of holding this one. Nara said that a Duke of Crestholme did not make his correspondence secretary the subject of a personal attachment. She said that the court would not overlook it and the consequences of the court's attention fell on her, not on him, and that this asymmetry was not one she had been willing to accept. Dorian said that he was not proposing a personal attachment that the court would be required to overlook. Nara was very still. He said that his intentions were considerably more formal than that and that he had known this for 3 months and had been attempting to identify the appropriate way to communicate it without creating the precise pressure that had apparently resulted in a pre-dawn departure, and that he had failed to identify it in time, and that he was attempting to address that failure now. The entrance hall. The morning staff. The pale marble and the high windows and the silver Crestholme crest catching the first light. Nara said that she did not know how to respond to that. Dorian said that she did not have to respond to it immediately. He said that he was simply asking her not to walk out of that door before she had heard it. A long pause. Nara said that she had heard it. He said, and there was something in his voice that was the precursor to what she would eventually understand was the specific quality of the Duke of Crestholme when he allowed himself to be entirely without architecture, that he was glad she had turned around. Nara said that she had not planned to turn around. He said that he knew that. She said that she had planned every detail of this departure for 2 months. He said that he was aware. He said that the quality of the planning was consistent with everything she had demonstrated in 9 months of working together and that it was also, characteristically, something she had been willing to do alone that she did not have to do alone. The morning light was full now. Around them the household staff had returned to their work with the careful attention of people who understand that they have witnessed something significant and are processing it in real time. Nara looked at Dorian Ashcroft in the entrance hall of Crestholme Palace at 5:30 in the morning and felt the accumulated weight of 9 months of precise and necessary distance release all at once, not violently, not dramatically, but with the specific quality of a thing that has been held very carefully for a very long time finally being set down. She said that her carriage was already on the road to the coast. He said that it could be recalled. She said that her trunk was in it. He said that the trunk could be returned. She said that the resignation letter was on his writing desk. He said that the resignation letter could be declined. A pause. She said, and there was something in her voice that she had not permitted in 9 months, something that was warmer and less managed and entirely her own, that he had a very specific way of addressing obstacles. Dorian said that she had observed this accurately. She said that she was not certain what came next. He said that neither was he with complete certainty, but that he would very much prefer to determine it with her present than absent. Nara looked at him for a moment. Then she said that she supposed the archive could wait. The Duke of Crestholme allowed something onto his face that she had never seen there in 9 months, not in the North Corridor, not in the East Gallery, not in any of the small accumulation of moments that had produced this morning. A smile. Not the courtly version, not the professional acknowledgement, but the real one, the one that reached the dark eyes and changed them entirely. He extended his hand. Nara looked at it. Then she placed her hand in his. And Crestholm Palace went on with its mourning. What the court could not contain. The court of Valdemir required approximately 6 hours to fully process what had occurred in the Crestholm entrance hall on the morning of the 15th of March. By noon of the same day, 3 interpretive versions were in circulation. By evening the version that was accurate had consolidated its position over the 2 that were not, primarily because the mourning household staff of Crestholm Palace were people of considerable observational precision and because what they had witnessed was not susceptible to significant misinterpretation. The Duke of Crestholm had called his correspondence secretary by her given name in front of the assembled household, and she had turned around, and they had spoken at close proximity in the entrance hall for 15 minutes. And at the end of those 15 minutes she had not left. The court had material. The court worked with it. Nara was not unaware of what was in motion. She had understood the morning's public nature from the moment her name had carried across 60 feet of marble to every set of ears in that hall. There was no version of the subsequent conversation that the court would not receive and process and form an opinion on. She had spent 9 months avoiding exactly this exposure, and in the space of one turned around it had become unavoidable. She found, to her own surprise, that she was less disturbed by this than she had expected. The disturbing version of the court's attention was the one in which she was alone in it. The version in which what had happened was a private feeling that the public had stumbled upon and was now examining without the subject's consent. That version was what she had been protecting herself from. This was different. Because Dorian Ashcroft had called her name in a room full of witnesses. He had made himself part of the public event. He had not protected his own exposure at the expense of hers. He had stepped into the same light and said the same thing he would have said in private, which told her something about the nature of the thing that all 9 months of careful professional observation had been preparing her to understand but had not fully delivered until this morning. The formal declaration came 4 weeks later. It came not as a private conversation but as a public announcement to the full court assembly at the April gathering, which was the prescribed formal occasion for declarations of personal intent among the titled nobility. Dorian Ashcroft stood before the assembled court and said, in the particular precise language of formal ducal declaration, that he intended to pursue a formal understanding with Lady Nara Vesson of the Vesson family, and that this intention was made before the assembled court in accordance with the proper form of declaration. The assembled court received this in the specific silence that follows something nobody was entirely expecting even when they had been expecting something. Lady Corianne Vance, seated in the 3rd row of the assembly, maintained an expression of composed indifference that cost her more than anyone present would know. Nara sat in the gallery above the assembly floor where the secretarial staff observed formal proceedings and heard the declaration with her hands folded in her lap and her expression entirely composed. Which was not an act of performance but the specific quality of a woman absorbing something so far beyond the architecture of what she had permitted herself to expect that the face goes very still while the interior catches up. Lord Vesson, her father, who had made the journey from the family seat for the April gathering at his daughter's cryptic suggestion that it might be worth attending, received the declaration from his position in the Assembly's Eastern Gallery with an expression that moved through surprise and satisfaction and landed on the particular quality of a father who has been waiting for his eldest daughter to find someone worth her exceptional capacity and has concluded that the wait was appropriate. He was not wrong. The weeks that followed had the quality of things that have been delayed becoming possible all at once. Nara remained at Crest Home. Not as correspondence secretary, though the correspondence work continued by mutual agreement and genuine necessity, the system she had built requiring continuity and her being the most qualified person to provide it. She remained as herself, without the precise professional architecture that had been both necessary and limiting, occupying a different position in the social geography of the palace. It was not always easy. The court was not universally generous in its reception of the arrangement. There were quarters in which Lady Nara Vesson was discussed in terms that were either uncharitable or reductive, and Nara was not unaware of these quarters, and there were days when the specific weight of being seen as an anomaly, as a woman who had arrived in a professional capacity and departed from it into something the court had not budgeted for, was a weight that required carrying. On one of these days she said this to Dorian. She said it directly, as was her habit, without softening the edges. She said that the court's interpretation of her position was something she encountered regularly and that she wanted him to know that she encountered it with composure, but that composure was not the same as imperviousness and that she was not immune to the weight of it. Dorian was quiet for a moment. Then he said that he was aware of the court's interpretation and that he had not been passive about addressing it. He said that 3 of the conversations he had conducted in the past 2 weeks had specifically concerned recalibrating the court's assessment of her qualifications and position, and that the recalibration was proceeding. Nara said that she was not asking him to fight her battles. He said that he was aware of that. He said that he was also aware that there was a distinction between fighting her battles and standing in the same light she was standing in, and that the second was what he intended. She absorbed this. She said that he had a way of addressing her concerns that was both effective and slightly disarming. He said that 9 months of her precise and unsparing analytical correspondence had prepared him for the specific quality of her directness and that he had studied accordingly. She said that she had not written the correspondence with that intention. He said that he knew. He said the value of it had been entirely independent of the intention. They were in the East Gallery when this conversation occurred, the room where she had first understood the depth of the difficulty, the window that overlooked the gardens and the southern road and, on clear days, the edge of the old forest. The afternoon light was the warm light of a spring that had arrived with more conviction than the winter before it, and the gardens below the window were in the particular fresh state of things that have survived cold and are making their return. Nara looked out at the garden. She said that she had almost walked out of that door. Dorian said that he knew. She said that she would have managed. That she had resources and capability and the archive position and a good foundation for building something adequate. He said that he had no doubt of that. She said that adequate was not the word for what was here instead. He turned from the window to look at her. She was looking at the garden, the spring gardens recovering and reviving and doing the work of return with the specific quiet persistence of things that are designed to do exactly that. She said that she was glad he had been standing in that gallery at 5:30. Dorian said that he had been standing in that gallery since 4:30. She looked at him. He said that Orlin had brought him the resignation letter at 10:30 the previous evening and that he had spent 6 hours determining what to do with the information and had arrived in the gallery before dawn because that was the window he had calculated she would cross the hall. Nara said that he had stood in the gallery for an hour before she entered the hall. He said yes. She said that was either meticulous planning or something else entirely. He said it was the second thing. The spring garden was below the window. The old forest was at the horizon. The east gallery was entirely theirs. Nara said that she had planned to be 3 miles down the coast road. Dorian said that she had been 5 feet from the door. She said that 5 feet was nothing. He said that from the east gallery it had appeared to be a considerable distance. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, quietly, that she was glad it had. He raised his hand and placed it against her jaw with the deliberateness of a man who has earned the right to do so through 6 hours in a cold gallery and 9 months of watching a woman he valued highly construct an architecture of necessary distance and choosing, on the 15th of March, to call her name anyway. Nara turned her face into his palm. The gallery was quiet. The garden below was in full spring. Lady Nara Vesson had arrived at Crestholme Palace 9 months ago with a satchel of correspondence tools and the very specific intention of staying exactly as long as required and developing no attachments to anything within the walls. She had failed at the second part within 6 weeks. She had tried to leave quietly at 9 months. She had been called back by her own name in front of everyone. And the distance that she had built so carefully and maintained so precisely and carried at such specific cost had turned out to be, in the final accounting, not the protective structure she had built it to be, but the distance between herself and the place she was already supposed to be. Some distances are not for crossing. Some distances cross themselves. All they require is one person willing to say a name out loud. The end. Enjoyed this story? If this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel right now and share it with someone who loves a royal romance. Every time we bring you stories of forbidden love, powerful choices, and the kind of devotion that refuses to be quiet. Tap subscribe, ring the notification bell and leave a comment telling us what part of this story stayed with you the most. Your support means everything and we will see you in the next story.